Appreciate everybody. I think everyone enjoyed their lunch and cigarette breaks and extra caffeine, so you'll be caffeinated and I won't put you to sleep, right? No? Is that better? Everyone can hear me, right? Okay. I'm going to be talking a little bit about the environmental impacts of T-shirts and do some introductions for the folks that are going after me and a little bit of rehash of what we saw this morning. Environmental impacts of shipping T-shirts. First of all, thank you to Shahir and Athena. Great presentation early this morning. If you hadn't gone and seen them in the break, please do so. Buy a book. It's really good. It's very easy to read, approachable. As well as Stina. If you haven't seen her, please go and see her. And the other things in the corridor here. So, who has been to an event before? Raise of hands here at garsonshaw. So, some of us, not everyone. These are some stats that we've used throughout the years. We're talking about the impacts of creating a new T-shirt. Matthias, I think, brought this to us 6 or 7 years ago first. And you can read for yourself, nearly 700 gallons of water are used to create one new T-shirt, producing 20 times its weight in carbon, and cotton is pesticide dependent. These are not new things, and if you want to take a look at the jeans thing that we have out there, that's really kind of the new goal, because we have some very denim-focused folks today. We can move on to what about the travels of our T-shirt? I'm the director of logistics for garsonshaw. We move a lot of clothing. We move a lot of freight. I like to call it corporate logistics. Shipping clothing does have an impact on the planet. Shipping has an impact on the planet. Shipping clothing does also. What is that impact? What about the shipping used clothing versus new clothing? What's the difference? We're going to talk about these things and what the shipping and logistics industry is doing to reduce these effects. So shipping, by the way, is by truck, by train, by plane, by ocean vessel. These are the main ways that we ship, also by mule, as Stina had talked about earlier. But these are the main things that happen in our world today, in the world of shipping. Truck and railroad are definitely the most visible part of the shipping industry. We see them on a daily basis. We drive with them on the freeway. They're very visible to us, right? Semi-trucks, however, emit more than 5 times the amount of greenhouse gases than cars. Their average miles per gallon is 6, which is pretty poor when you're talking about, our cars and the new types of transportation, cars out there, electric, gas, all these types of things. Rail is 4 times more efficient than truck. So if you would see this, and this is evident in the stats, where rail is a lot more utilized in the past 15, 20 years. We're shipping a lot more freight by rail. We're doing double stacks. Infrastructure has increased in the U.S. for bridges and things like this. So we're moving in that direction. We're doing a lot more rail, but we're not going to get away from the way that the shipping is. So what can we do to minimize these effects? Ocean. I'd just like to read through these stats, some things that we might not consider on a day-to-day basis. Ocean container shipping is one of the least regulated industries in the world and contributes to both air and water pollution. That's obvious. We might not think about this on a day-to-day basis, but it's very true. Crazy stat. Only 18 ocean vessels pollute more than all of the cars in the world. 8 million cars in the world. We talk about pollution as emissions for our cars. And there are a lot of cars on the road, not just in the US, but in China, in India, and very big, growing populations. So there are over 90,000 vessels currently in operation around the globe at any given point. And that is equivalent to about 200 billion cars on the road. That's a drop in the bucket, essentially. All the other transportation emissions are a drop in the bucket towards when you compare them to ocean vessels. So they do a lot of pollution. Average fuel consumption from one vessel is over 6,000 liters per hour, and ocean vessels use over 7 million barrels of oil a day, which is about 10% of the entire world's production of oil. Marine traffic accounts for 2.7 of all the greenhouse gases. So these are some pretty staggering stats, right? And you say, wow, why do we ship so much in ocean? Why is this happening? And we'll go a little bit into why. And the why really comes to the emissions. We can talk about the emissions as per a ton of cargo and the way that we move. And this is a metric system, and I know a lot of people aren't familiar with this, but 10 grams of CO2 to carry 1 ton of cargo is ocean. And that's a good thing, right? Compared to double that of rail, compared to 6 times that of a truck, and 47, it's air, obviously. We're not going to talk about air. We don't ship in air, and you can see why. For those of you who are more familiar with miles and miles per gallon, this is a much easier stat to see. Miles per gallon to move one 40-foot container, and we deal in 40-foot containers, right? So 78 miles per gallon to move one container is pretty good, right? And rail is 15. It's not very good, but it's still efficient. And by truck is 6, and air is less than that. The reason why these things are like that, because one vessel can carry 90,000 TEUs, that's 20-foot containers, so 45,000 40-foot containers on one vessel. Those are the bigger vessels, obviously, these days, and the shipping lines are becoming more and more progressive using bigger vessels. As long as the ports can accept them, we see all these dredging things and ports becoming more and more efficient around bigger vessels. So these are compared to shipping the same weight and over 1,000 or 1,100 747s, 76 miles of train, or 11,000 trucks. So when we talk about the difference, and that's why ocean vessel transportation is so much more efficient than other ways, and it's because of the capacity of these vessels. So let's talk about the industry that we're in, shipping new versus used. These two examples are what is happening volume-wise in the world right now. The first example, 3 million grams of CO2 emitted into the atmosphere for one 40-foot container with new T-shirts, Shanghai to Los Angeles. We know that most of the new clothing in the world are produced abroad, China, for instance. And with packaging and new packaging, they can't fit more than 22,000 pounds typically on one 40-foot container. Therefore, we have a lot less weight in a new container, which increases the inefficiencies, essentially, of shipping one container. We're looking at a very, very common theme of volume transportation from New York to Santo Tomas with 1 million grams of CO2 emitted. Now, obviously, that's a much shorter distance, New York to Guatemala versus Shanghai to Los Angeles, so it's not apples to apples, but it is the most volume that's happening in the world, new versus used. And in addition to it being shorter, we also move double the weight. So, talk about just one container, we're 3 times as more CO2 emissions in savings, and you can double that just because of the weight. So you can see that what we're doing on a day-to-day basis with shipping used clothing is not only saving in the water consumption and the off-run from the factories and dyes and all the things that go into making new product, but also shipping it from China. We're making some savings, and this is what the industry that we're in. So innovations in the trucking industry, we're talking about innovations in all the industries. Basically, technology is always forward-moving, and we can see that in some of the freight that we move from time to time on a daily basis. Energy-efficient engines, we're talking about better miles per gallon. We're talking about alternative fuels like gas, natural gases. This is an example of a Tesla truck that runs on all batteries. It's Tesla. So an electric truck. Aerodynamics, we see a lot of these kind of on our day-to-day basis because trucks are very visible Like the skirts underneath the trailer, you can see like these big plastic things, or off of the back of the trailer, they call it an apron. Those really help the efficiency of the truck moving down the freeway and really increase its miles per gallon, fuel consumption, et cetera. Better for the environment, better for the driver, better for the trucking companies, better for the earth. We also talk about driver education, these types of things. Georgia specifically has a commercial lane in operation from Atlanta to Macon, and this is a lane only for commercial vehicles. And these things are probably going to become a lot more commonplace, where your normal cars, your four-wheeled cars are not going to be driving next to big trucks. They're going to be doing it by themselves. It's a lot safer. We'll get into automation, which I think is right around the corner for not just your self-driving cars, but also for the freight industry. We see a lot of the same for the rail industry. Infrastructure allowing for triple stack containers. Like I said earlier, a little bit about, you can see the rail, these double stack. Our infrastructure in the US is not geared for triple stack containers. We can barely fit double stacks underneath bridges. We'll look at other European countries and even in Canada, we have triple stack trailers. And that not only is more energy efficient, but it's a lot safer as long as the infrastructure can accept it. More so in the energy efficient engines, et cetera. Just taking technology to a different level as far as the energy consumption for moving this much freight. Ocean. Very exciting things happening in the ocean industry also. Larger ships, obviously we talked about that briefly, engine technologies and alternative fuels. The organizations, we said earlier that the marine transportation is one of the least regulated. It's least regulated because it's across the world, it's across the globe, it's in international waters. So they are self-regulating. They're a self-regulating kind of industry right now, and they've done a very good job in the past 15 years to reduce their emissions. There's new bunker fuel prices, a lot of the freight really heavy. People can understand these things are terrible for our freight rates, right? You see freight rates going up. But there are reasons for that, and some of those reasons are for the technologies that we're seeing, and the IMO, International Maritime Organization, and the World Shipping Council are enacting. By 2020, that's just next year, they're gearing down from 3.5% of global emissions to 0.1, which is parts per million. Summaries and solutions. Obviously, the trend for the shipping industry all around the globe is to get better. And people are very, very conscious of the environment and very conscious of emissions and conscious of the not just energy savings, but cost savings that they have for their fleet or for their vessel or for their rail terminals and things like that. So saving for the environment is also saving in your pocket. And I think that the industry is well aware of this and making those steps. Even though we see some amazing leaps in technology to help reduce these costs, we're still transporting a very large amount of freight around the globe. I don't think that you and I are going to change the way that the freight operates in this world, but we can do things like buying local. We can do a lot more things like sustainable energy, farming, whatever you want to do at home. I'm not going to make you do it. You have to decide to do it yourself. And so this is the participate in change that Stina has talked about, that Shahir had talked about, and I think that we'll see a lot more of as the day progresses. Huba and the afternoon presentations are going to be a lot more about the reuse and the recycling, upcycling, and downcycling, and the other things that we do to cut the cost of waste in the waste and textile industry. So if anyone has any questions, now would be the time to ask them about transportation. Yes?
Very nice presentation.
Thank you, Lee.
What trends have you seen in the way of rates for these various modes of transportation?
You're talking about specifically over-the-road rates, LTL rates, ocean rates, or what?
All of them.
All of them. Well, the trend is that they're going up, but everyone wants to make more money. But these things do take some time to be in place and start seeing the cost savings for trucking companies. So not only fuel costs are going up, but the cost to change into different types of fuels and alternative fuels are very cost prohibited, honestly, and they have been for a long time. And that's what the industry is kind of moving and gearing towards. So, in shortly, they'll be rising.
Have you seen more consolidation within these modes?
We definitely see a lot more consolidation to rail versus truck. The rail lines are doing a fantastic job laying more track, unlike Amtrak in this country. They're laying track and they're making new lanes. We just had a new one in Atlanta here, well, just north of Atlanta, and that will be servicing Chattanooga, Tennessee area. We see a lot of new terminals like that, specifically in the rail. Ocean, by far, is something that it's always progressing. We can talk about any number of regulations that are intact now that weren't 3 or 4 years ago. We can see, most of the emissions in an ocean vessel are 200, 300 kilometers from the land, which really affect, all of the biodiversity around land and communities that are affected by that. So most of the restrictions are in that area. Yes?
So we're experiencing a real shortage in containers, and some of it, I'm being told, is because of the shortage of, or the embargo on imports coming in from China. Can you talk to that a little bit about
Sure.
What you envisage for the future?
Yes. The U.S. imports much, much more than we export, and therefore, to get containers into the far reaches of the internal U.S., the Midwest, the West in general, or up into Toronto, for instance, you have to take as much imports. Shipping lines don't want to take the cost themselves of shipping empty containers into the interior of the U.S. to load things and get them out. We also see a lot more consolidation in the shipping line industry. Shipping lines are buying each other out. There's a lot of that's happening. We've seen that a lot, honestly, over the past 5 years. And some of what we have seen is when this transition is coming to fruition, they're moving on to obviously different names, different colors, a new fleet of containers and things like that. So not just the containers that are available, they're restructuring, they're making new, they're refurbishing, they're changing their IT systems, All these things take a lot of time, and as customers and customer service, we can see the freight industry is really frustrating in that sense. I hope that answers your question.